The crowd at Sweetwater Station fell silent as Rebecca Grant stepped off the train, her silver-gray hair gleaming in the afternoon sun. At 28, her prematurely gray tresses had become both her cross to bear and her most distinctive feature, setting her apart in ways she'd never wanted. The whispers began almost immediately, carried on the dry Wyoming breeze of 1875 like tumbleweeds across the platform. Rebecca clutched her small valise tighter, her knuckles whitening as she scanned the faces for the man who had answered her advertisement in the matrimonial news. 3 months of correspondence had led her here, to this dusty frontier town, to marry a stranger whose words on paper had given her hope for a new beginning. "That can't be the bride Frank Hollister sent for," a woman's voice carried clearly. "Why, she looks like someone's grandmother." Laughter rippled through the small crowd gathered at the station. Rebecca felt her cheeks burn, but she held her head high, just as she had done since the first silver strand had appeared when she was barely 20. "Excuse me, folks." A deep voice cut through the murmurs. "I'd appreciate it if you'd show some respect." The crowd parted, revealing a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and kind eyes. He stood straight and confident, his hat held respectfully in his hands. Samuel Morrison wasn't what Rebecca had expected. Frank Hollister's letters had described a business associate who needed a wife, not this rugged cowboy with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the western sky. "Miss Grant?" he asked, approaching her with measured steps. Rebecca nodded, finding her voice. "Yes. I was expecting Mr. Hollister." Samuel's expression turned apologetic. "Frank sends his regrets. He's been called east on urgent business. I'm Samuel Morrison. I manage the Circle M ranch neighboring Frank's property." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "He asked me to collect you and explain the situation." Rebecca felt the stares of the townspeople boring into her back. Her journey from Boston had been long and exhausting, and now this unexpected development threatened to unravel what little composure she had left. "I see," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel must have noticed her discomfort because he stepped closer, positioning himself between her and the onlookers. "My wagon's just over there. Let me take your bags." As they walked away from the platform, Rebecca heard more whispers. Poor Samuel Morrison, stuck escorting an old maid. Frank Hollister must be mighty relieved he had business elsewhere. Samuel stopped abruptly and turned to face the crowd. His voice was level but carried an undercurrent of steel. "Miss Grant has traveled a long way at Frank's invitation. She deserves a proper welcome to Sweetwater, not your gossip." The crowd shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. Samuel turned back to Rebecca, offering his arm. "Shall we, Miss Grant?" Rebecca took his arm, grateful for his kindness but acutely aware of the stares following them. As Samuel helped her into the wagon, a young woman with a pinched face called out, "Better check if she brought her knitting needles, Samuel. You'll need something to keep you entertained on the ride home." More laughter erupted, and Rebecca felt her heart sink. This wasn't the fresh start she had hoped for. Samuel settled beside her on the wagon seat, his jaw tight. "Don't mind them. Small towns breed small minds sometimes. Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Morrison, but you needn't defend me. I'm quite accustomed to such reactions." Rebecca straightened her back, years of practiced dignity coming to her aid. Samuel flicked the reins, and the wagon lurched forward. "Well, you shouldn't have to be, and it's Samuel. Please." They rode in silence for several minutes, the town of Sweetwater shrinking behind them as the vast Wyoming landscape opened up before them. Rolling hills dotted with sagebrush stretched toward distant mountains, the late September sun casting long shadows across the terrain. "Mr. Hollister wrote that he would meet me himself," Rebecca finally said, her voice carefully neutral. "May I ask when he's expected to return?" Samuel's hands tightened on the reins. "That's part of what I need to explain. Frank isn't coming back, Miss Grant." Rebecca turned to look at him, confusion etched on her face. I don't understand. Frank Hollister has left Wyoming Territory for good. He's sold his ranch and moved back east. Samuel's voice was gentle but direct. He left 2 weeks ago, not long after your last letter arrived confirming your travel plans. The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. But why would he continue with our arrangement if he intended to leave? Samuel sighed, looking uncomfortable. Frank wasn't always the most honorable of men. When he received your daguerreotype and saw your gray hair, he trailed off, clearly reluctant to continue. He decided he didn't want me. Rebecca finished for him, her voice hollow. She had included the image in her final letter, wanting to be honest about her appearance despite knowing the risk. Apparently, her honesty had cost her a husband. "I'm sorry," Samuel said, and she could hear the genuine regret in his voice. "Frank asked me to meet you and explain. He left money for your return ticket to Boston." Rebecca felt numb. Return to Boston? To what? She had sold most of her possessions, given up her position as a schoolteacher, and said goodbye to the few friends she had. There was nothing waiting for her back east except the same loneliness and pitying glances she'd fled from. "I see," she said quietly, staring straight ahead at the trail. "And where are we going now?" "To my ranch for tonight. I've arranged a room for you at the boarding house in town starting tomorrow, until you decide what you want to do." Rebecca nodded absently, her mind racing. She had exactly $23.47 to her name after purchasing her train ticket west. Not enough to establish herself in a new town, barely enough for the return journey Frank Hollister had so generously funded. They traveled in silence for nearly an hour, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves. The landscape grew more rugged, with rocky outcroppings breaking up the rolling grasslands. "Your hair is beautiful," Samuel said suddenly, breaking the silence. Rebecca turned to him in surprise, certain she had misheard. "I beg your pardon?" "Your hair," he repeated, keeping his eyes on the trail ahead. "It's beautiful, like moonlight on silver water." Frank was a fool. Rebecca felt her cheeks warm, but not from embarrassment this time. "That's very kind of you to say, Mr. Morrison, but unnecessary. I'm well aware of how unusual it is for someone my age." "Samuel," he corrected gently, "and it's not kindness, just truth. My mother's hair turned the same way when she was young. By the time she was 30, not a dark strand remained. She used to say God gave her silver early because he knew she'd need the wisdom it represented." Rebecca couldn't help but smile at that. "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Samuel agreed, a wistful note in his voice. "Strongest person I ever knew. Raised 5 children on her own after my father died in '55. Kept the ranch going too." "I'm sorry for your loss," Rebecca said softly. Samuel nodded his acknowledgement. "It was a long time ago. The ranch is mine now. Not as big as some, but it's good land. 1,500 acres, almost 300 head of cattle." Pride resonated in his voice as he spoke of his home. As they crested a hill, Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop. There it is, Circle M. Below them stretched a picturesque valley. A creek wound through the center, its banks lined with cottonwoods turning golden with the approach of autumn. A modest but well-maintained ranch house stood near the water, surrounded by several outbuildings. In the distance, cattle grazed on the rolling grasslands. "It's lovely," Rebecca said sincerely. Samuel smiled, the first full smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the weathered lines around his eyes. "It's home." They continued down the hill, and as they drew closer to the ranch house, Rebecca could see signs of careful attention everywhere. The split-rail fences were solid and even, the barn freshly painted, the yard swept clean. This was a place loved by its owner. A young boy of about 12 came running from the barn as they approached, followed by an older man with a slight limp. "That's Robbie, my ranch hand's son," Samuel explained. "And that's Elijah. Been with the ranch since my father's time." Samuel brought the wagon to a halt in front of the house and jumped down, coming around to help Rebecca descend. As her feet touched the ground, her legs wobbled slightly after the long journey. Samuel's hand at her elbow steadied her, strong and reassuring. "Miss Grant, this is Elijah Wilson and Robbie Anderson. Gentlemen, this is Miss Rebecca Grant." Elijah touched the brim of his hat respectfully. "Madam, welcome to Circle M." Robbie stared openly at Rebecca's hair, but not with the usual mockery she had come to expect. Instead, his expression was one of fascination. "Your hair looks like starlight, madam," he said with a child's directness. Rebecca felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Thank you, Robbie. That's a very poetic observation." The boy beamed at the praise. "Robbie, why don't you take Miss Grant's bag to the guest room?" Samuel suggested. "Elijah, could you see to the horses?" As the boy carefully took her valise and the older man led the team away, Samuel guided Rebecca toward the house. "It's not much, but it's comfortable. My sister Martha usually stays in the guest room when she visits, so it's properly set up for a lady." The ranch house was surprisingly spacious inside, with high ceilings and large windows that caught the late afternoon light. The furnishings were simple but of good quality. And everywhere Rebecca looked, she saw evidence of care and attention to detail. Fresh wildflowers stood in a mason jar on the dining table, colorful quilts draped over the backs of chairs, and bookshelves lined one wall of the main room. "You have quite a collection," Rebecca observed, moving toward the books with natural curiosity. Samuel looked pleased by her interest. "Reading helps pass the winter evenings. Feel free to borrow anything that catches your eye." Rebecca ran her fingers along the spines, noting volumes of poetry, history, and even some novels. "I wouldn't have expected to find Austen and Dickens on a cattle ranch in Wyoming Territory." "My mother insisted her children be educated, frontier or no frontier," Samuel explained. "Martha left most of her books when she married and moved to Cheyenne. I've added some of my own over the years." The domesticity of the scene struck Rebecca forcefully. This was what she had hoped for in coming west, not grand passion or adventure, but a home, a place of belonging. And now that hope had been dashed by Frank Hollister's rejection. "I've put a stew on for supper," Samuel said, moving toward the kitchen area at the back of the house. "It should be ready soon. Would you like to rest before we eat? The journey must have been exhausting." "That would be lovely. Thank you." Rebecca suddenly felt every mile of the long journey in her weary bones. Samuel showed her to a small but comfortable bedroom. A patchwork quilt covered the bed, and curtains of faded blue cotton framed the window. Robbie had placed her valise at the foot of the bed and had apparently drawn water for washing, as a basin and pitcher stood on the dresser alongside a clean towel. "Take all the time you need," Samuel said. "Supper won't be for another hour or so." When he had gone, closing the door behind him, Rebecca sank onto the edge of the bed. The reality of her situation crashed over her in waves. She was thousands of miles from everything familiar, rejected by the man who was to be her husband, with limited funds and few options. She moved to the small mirror hanging above the dresser and studied her reflection. The woman who gazed back at her had clear green eyes set in a face that was still youthful, despite the silver hair that framed it. Her mother had called it her crown of glory in the early days, before the whispers began, before the suitors stopped calling. Rebecca unpinned her hair and let it fall around her shoulders, the silver strands catching the light from the window. She was neither old nor ugly, despite what the gossips might say. She was simply different, marked by a quirk of nature that had shaped the course of her life as surely as the creek below had shaped the valley. After washing away the dust of travel and changing into a fresh dress of deep blue muslin, Rebecca felt somewhat restored. She repinned her hair in a simpler style than the traveling arrangement and made her way back to the main room. The aroma of cooking food filled the house, making her suddenly aware of how hungry she was. She found Samuel at the stove, stirring a large pot of stew. He looked up as she entered, and something in his expression made her pause. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Samuel seemed to collect himself. "Yes, of course. You look rested. That's good." He turned back to the stew, but not before Rebecca caught a faint redness creeping up his neck above his collar. "Can I help with anything?" she offered. "You could set the table if you like. Plates are in that cupboard, utensils in the drawer below." They worked together in companionable silence, and Rebecca found herself appreciating the easy rhythm they fell into. Samuel moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to managing for himself, but there was nothing rough or careless about his actions. As they sat down to eat, joined by Elijah and Robbie, Rebecca felt some of her anxiety ease. The food was simple but delicious hearty beef stew with fresh baked bread that Samuel explained came from his nearest neighbor, a widow named Mrs. Chen, who traded baked goods for beef and protection. The conversation flowed naturally, with Robbie eagerly sharing stories of his day's adventures and Elijah occasionally interjecting with dry humor. Samuel spoke little but seemed content to listen, his eyes often drifting to Rebecca as if checking that she was comfortable. After the meal, Elijah and Robbie retired to the bunkhouse, leaving Rebecca and Samuel alone. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken questions about tomorrow and the days to follow. "I should explain about the boarding house arrangements," Samuel said finally, moving to pour them each a cup of coffee. "Mrs. Whitaker runs a respectable establishment in town. Mostly school teachers and clerks stay there. You'll have your privacy and proper accommodations while you decide your next steps." Rebecca accepted the coffee gratefully. "That's very thoughtful of you. I must admit, I'm at something of a loss as to what those next steps should be." Samuel settled into the chair across from her. "Sweetwater could use a teacher. The last one left to get married 2 months ago." "Teaching is my profession," Rebecca acknowledged. "Or was, in Boston. But after today's reception, I'm not certain the town would welcome me in such a position." Samuel's expression darkened. "Don't judge all of Sweetwater by a few mean-spirited gossips. Most folks are good people just trying to make their way, same as anywhere." "Perhaps," Rebecca conceded, sipping her coffee. "But first impressions matter, especially for a teacher. Parents might not want their children taught by a woman they view as unusual." "Because of your hair?" Samuel shook his head. "That's nonsense." "The world is full of nonsense, Mr. Morrison. I've had 28 years to learn that lesson." Samuel studied her for a long moment. "You're not what I expected, Miss Grant." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And what did you expect?" "Frank showed me your letters. They were well written, educated, proper. I expected someone fragile, I suppose, Eastern and delicate." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "But there's steel in you." Rebecca felt an answering smile form on her own lips. "Necessity forges steel, Mr. Morrison, or so I'm told." Their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them, a moment of recognition, of mutual respect. Samuel cleared his throat and stood. "It's getting late. You must be tired." Rebecca nodded and rose as well. "Yes, it's been a very long day. Thank you for your hospitality." "You're welcome to anything you need. My room is at the end of the hall if you require assistance during the night." Rebecca bid him good night and retreated to the guest room, her mind whirling with the day's events. As she prepared for bed, she tried to organize her thoughts, to plan rationally for the future, but exhaustion soon overtook her. Her last conscious thought before sleep claimed her was of Samuel's words. "Your hair is beautiful, like moonlight on silver water." Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the curtains and the distant sounds of ranch life already in full swing. Rebecca dressed quickly in one of her plainest dresses suitable for travel and pinned her hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. The main room was empty when she emerged, but a note on the table in a strong, clear hand informed her that breakfast was keeping warm on the stove, and Samuel would return shortly from morning chores. Rebecca helped herself to the eggs and bacon Samuel had left for her, appreciating the thoughtfulness of the gesture. She was just finishing when the door opened and Samuel entered, bringing with him the scent of fresh air and horses. "Good morning," he greeted her, removing his hat. "Did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you," Rebecca replied. "The food was delicious." Samuel smiled, looking pleased. "Glad to hear it. I'm afraid I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage the basics." He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from her. "I need to be honest with you about something, Miss Grant." Rebecca steeled herself, wondering what new complication awaited her. "I haven't arranged a room at the boarding house yet," Samuel admitted. "I was going to ride into town this morning to speak with Mrs. Whitaker." "I see," Rebecca said carefully. "Is there some difficulty?" Samuel looked uncomfortable. "Not exactly, but before I make those arrangements, I wanted to, that is, I have a proposition for you." Rebecca felt her guard rise instantly. She had heard propositions before, from men who thought her unusual appearance meant she should be grateful for any attention, no matter how dishonorable. Seeing her expression, Samuel hastened to clarify. "A business proposition, Miss Grant. Entirely proper." "I'm listening," she said, relaxing slightly. Samuel set down his coffee cup and leaned forward, his expression earnest. "As you saw yesterday, Sweetwater can be unwelcoming to newcomers. The boarding house is comfortable enough, but it's in town, where you'd face those same people every day." Rebecca nodded, understanding all too well. "My proposition is this: stay here at Circle M as my housekeeper. The position comes with room and board, plus a monthly wage of $20. Rebecca blinked in surprise. It was a generous offer, far better than she might have hoped for given her circumstances. "That's very kind, but—" "It's not kindness," Samuel interrupted. "It's practicality. I need someone to manage the house. Since my sister married and moved away, things have been— well, you can probably tell that a woman's touch is missing around here." Rebecca glanced around the room. While clean and orderly enough, she could see what he meant. The curtains needed mending, dust had gathered on the higher shelves, and there was a general sense of a home maintained for function rather than comfort. "It would be temporary, of course," Samuel continued, "just until you decide what you want to do next, whether that's taking the teaching position in town, returning east, or—" he hesitated, "or something else entirely." Rebecca considered the offer carefully. It solved her immediate problem of accommodation and provided income while she planned her next steps. The ranch was beautiful and peaceful, far from the curious stares and whispers of the townspeople. And if she were honest with herself, the thought of returning to the empty boarding house room that awaited her in Boston held little appeal. "What about propriety?" she asked, a single woman living in the home of a bachelor. "Elijah and Robbie are always here," Samuel pointed out. "And my nearest neighbors, the Chens, are just over that ridge. Mrs. Chen comes by several times a week. There would be nothing improper about the arrangement." Rebecca took a deep breath. "Very well, Mr. Morrison. I accept your proposition, at least for the time being." The relief on Samuel's face was evident. "Excellent. And please, it's Samuel. If we're to share a roof, we might as well use Christian names." "Rebecca," she offered in return, feeling strangely as though she had just agreed to something more significant than a temporary employment arrangement. Samuel rode into town that morning to collect the remainder of Rebecca's luggage from the station and to purchase a few supplies. Left alone at the ranch, Rebecca took the opportunity to explore her new temporary home more thoroughly. The house was larger than it had first appeared, with 4 bedrooms, a study that looked rarely used, and a summer kitchen attached to the back. Everything was functional but plain, clearly maintained by a man who valued order but had little time or inclination for decoration. Rebecca found herself making mental notes of improvements that could be made with minimal expense: cushions for the hard wooden chairs, curtains that actually matched from room to room, perhaps some dried flowers to brighten the darker corners. Outside, the ranch sprawled in all directions. The barn and corrals stood to the north of the house, with a chicken coop and small vegetable garden to the south. Beyond, pasture land stretched toward distant hills. The setting was breathtaking in its rugged beauty, so different from the crowded streets of Boston. Robbie found her admiring the view from the front porch. "Miss Grant, Pa said you're staying on as housekeeper. That true?" Rebecca smiled at the boy's directness. "For the time being, yes." Robbie grinned, revealing a missing front tooth. "That's swell. Mr. Morrison's cooking is awful, especially his biscuits. Like rocks they are." "Is that so?" Rebecca laughed. "Well, I'll have to see if I can improve on them." "Can I show you around?" the boy offered eagerly. "I know every inch of Circle M." Rebecca accepted, and Robbie proved to be an enthusiastic guide, pointing out everything from the best fishing spots along the creek to which hens laid the biggest eggs. His chatter was a welcome distraction from her worries about the future. When Samuel returned in the early afternoon, he found Rebecca in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, kneading dough for bread while Robbie sat at the table shelling peas. "Looks like you've settled in," Samuel observed, setting down her trunk and several packages. Rebecca brushed a strand of hair from her forehead with the back of her wrist. "Robbie has been helping me get acquainted with the ranch, and I thought I'd make myself useful right away." "Smells wonderful already," Samuel said appreciatively. "But you didn't need to start work the moment I left." "I've never been one for idleness," Rebecca replied. "Besides, baking helps me think." Samuel nodded as if this made perfect sense to him. "I brought the rest of your things, and some fabric Mrs. Chen had at her place that she thought you might like for curtains or such. Her idea, not mine." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Rebecca. "Please thank her for me. I'd like to meet her soon." "Sunday, probably. The Chens always come for dinner after church." Samuel hesitated. "I should warn you, the town will be talking about you staying here." Rebecca sighed. "I suspected as much. Will it cause difficulties for you?" Samuel shrugged. "Nothing I can't handle. People have been talking about the bachelor rancher for years. One more thing for them to gossip about won't make much difference." But Rebecca knew it would make a difference. A man living alone on his ranch was one thing. Taking in a mail-order bride rejected by another man was quite another, especially one with her distinctive appearance. "If it becomes a problem, I can always move to the boarding house later," she offered. Samuel's expression turned stubborn. "The only problem would be letting small-minded gossip dictate our decisions. I offered you a position because I need a housekeeper. What the town thinks about it is their business, not ours." His defense warmed something inside Rebecca that had been cold for a long time. It had been years since anyone had stood up for her so firmly. The next few days fell into an easy rhythm. Rebecca took charge of the household with quiet efficiency, bringing order and comfort to spaces that had clearly lacked a woman's touch for some time. Samuel spent his days working with the cattle and making repairs around the ranch, coming in for meals that grew increasingly elaborate as Rebecca settled into her role. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes reading in companionable silence, sometimes talking. Rebecca learned that Samuel had been born on this very ranch, the middle child of 5. His father had been one of the first settlers in the area, arriving in 1848 after the Mexican-American War opened up new territories. Samuel, in turn, listened attentively as Rebecca shared stories of her life in Boston, teaching at a girls' school while caring for her ailing mother until her death 3 years prior. "And your hair?" he asked one evening, his voice gentle. "When did it begin to change?" Rebecca touched the silver strands reflexively. "When I was 20. At first it was just a few strands at my temples. The doctor said it was likely hereditary, though neither of my parents experienced it." She gave a small, sad smile. "By 25, it was completely silver. My mother called it distinguished. Others were less kind." "It suits you," Samuel said simply. "I can't imagine you any other way." On Sunday morning, Samuel drove Rebecca to the small church in Sweetwater. She had been apprehensive about facing the townspeople again, but Samuel had been insistent. "If you're going to stay in the area, you can't avoid town forever," he'd reasoned. "Better to face them head-on, with your head held high." Rebecca wore her best dress for the occasion, a deep green wool that complemented her eyes, and arranged her hair in an elegant twist that showcased rather than hid its silvery color. If she was to be stared at regardless, she might as well give them something worth staring at. The whispers began the moment they entered the church, heads turning and conversations pausing. Rebecca felt Samuel stiffen beside her, but she placed a calming hand on his arm. "It's all right," she murmured. "I'm quite used to it." They took seats near the back, and gradually the initial flurry of interest subsided. The service itself was pleasant enough, with a young minister whose sermon on acceptance and loving one's neighbor seemed almost pointed in its timing. After the service, Samuel introduced Rebecca to several people, including the minister and his wife, who were genuinely welcoming. Others were politely reserved, clearly uncertain what to make of the situation. "Miss Grant will be staying at Circle M as my housekeeper," Samuel explained repeatedly, his tone making it clear he expected no further comment on the arrangement. They were preparing to leave when a woman approached them, her expression openly hostile. Rebecca recognized her as one of the more vocal critics from the train station. "Mr. Morrison," the woman said coldly, "I see you've taken in Frank Hollister's reject." Samuel's face darkened, but before he could respond, Rebecca stepped forward. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced," she said, with perfect composure. "Rebecca Grant." "And you are?" The woman seemed taken aback by Rebecca's calm demeanor. "Beatrice Watson." "Mrs. Watson, I understand your concern about propriety. A single woman working in a bachelor's home can certainly raise eyebrows." Rebecca smiled pleasantly. "But I assure you, my position at Circle M is purely professional. Mr. Morrison has been kind enough to offer me employment when I found myself in difficult circumstances. Nothing more." Mrs. Watson's eyes narrowed. "Kind, is it? I wonder what other kindnesses are involved." Samuel made a choking sound beside her, but Rebecca continued smoothly. "The only kindness I've experienced is Christian charity toward a stranger in need. Something I believe we're all called to offer. Are we not?" She glanced meaningfully toward the pulpit where the minister had just preached on that very topic. Mrs. Watson flushed, clearly not expecting to be outmaneuvered so neatly. She opened her mouth to respond, but at that moment, an older woman with iron gray hair pulled into a severe bun approached. "Beatrice Watson, that's quite enough," the newcomer said firmly. "You're making a spectacle of yourself in the Lord's house." Mrs. Watson huffed, but retreated under the older woman's stern gaze. "Thank you," Rebecca said to her rescuer. "Edith Whittaker," the woman introduced herself. "I run the boarding house in town." She eyed Rebecca appraisingly. "You handle yourself well, Miss Grant." "Years of practice, Mrs. Whittaker." The older woman nodded as if this confirmed something for her. "We need a new teacher for the school. Term starts in 2 weeks. The position pays $30 a month plus a room at my boarding house, if you're interested." Rebecca blinked in surprise. "That's very kind, but—" "It's not kindness," Mrs. Whittaker interrupted. It's practicality. You're clearly educated, and we have 27 children in need of schooling. I'm on the school board, and we're desperate. Rebecca glanced at Samuel, who looked equally surprised by the offer. Think about it, Mrs. Whitaker said. Let me know by Wednesday. With that, she nodded briskly and moved away. Well, Samuel said as they walked to the wagon, that was unexpected. Rebecca was still processing the sudden job offer. Do you think she's serious? After everything? Edith Whitaker doesn't say things she doesn't mean, Samuel replied. And she's right. They do need a teacher badly. As they drove out of town, Rebecca found herself torn. The teaching position was exactly what she had hoped to find, eventually a way to support herself independently, doing work she loved and was trained for. But it would mean leaving Circle M, leaving the peaceful routine she had begun to establish, leaving Samuel. The thought gave her pause. In just a few short days, Samuel Morrison had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. His quiet strength, his unfailing kindness, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, all had worked their way into her consciousness. But such thoughts were dangerous. Samuel had offered her a position as his housekeeper, nothing more. That he treated her with respect and defended her against gossip spoke to his character, not to any particular interest in her as a woman. After church, they collected the Chen family for Sunday dinner at Circle M. Li Chen was a dignified man in his 50s who had come to America during the gold rush of '49, eventually settling in Wyoming with his much younger wife, May, and their 3 children. The Chens had established a successful market garden on their small property neighboring Circle M, supplying much of the fresh produce for Sweetwater. Machen took to Rebecca immediately, delighting in having another woman to talk to. So few ladies out here, she explained in accented but clear English. Most not want to talk to Chinese women. Their loss entirely, Rebecca said sincerely, already charmed by May's warm personality and quick wit. The afternoon passed pleasantly, with the children playing with Robbie in the yard while the adults conversed on the porch. Samuel and Lee discussed cattle prices and water rights, while Rebecca and May exchanged recipes and household tips. As the Chens prepared to leave, May pressed a small package into Rebecca's hands. For your hair, she explained. Special comb made from buffalo horn. Very good for silver hair. Make it shine like moonlight. Rebecca was touched by the thoughtful gift. Thank you, May. I'll treasure it. You stay here, yes? May asked, glancing between Rebecca and Samuel with knowing eyes. Not go to town to teach? I haven't decided yet, Rebecca admitted. May nodded sagely. Some decisions not made with head, some made with heart. With that cryptic comment, she joined her family in their wagon. As the week progressed, Rebecca found the decision weighing heavily on her mind. The teaching position offered independence and purpose, but leaving Circle M would mean abandoning the sense of home she had begun to find there. Samuel had been careful not to influence her either way, simply stating that the choice was hers to make and that she would have a place at Circle M for as long as she wished, regardless of what she decided about the teaching position. On Tuesday evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Rebecca finally voiced the question that had been troubling her. Samuel, why did you really offer me the position here? Samuel looked surprised. I told you I needed a housekeeper. You managed without one before I arrived, Rebecca pointed out. And while I'd like to think I've improved things, the ranch certainly wasn't falling apart in my absence. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. When Frank showed me your letters, he finally said, I could tell you were different. Thoughtful, educated but not pretentious. Then when he received your photograph and decided not to go through with the marriage, he shook his head. It made me angry. That he would reject someone based on something so superficial. Rebecca listened, her heart beating a little faster. "When I saw you step off that train," Samuel continued, "with your head held high despite the whispers, I knew I'd been right about you. You had courage, and when I saw how you handled yourself with dignity, even as they mocked you," he turned to look at her directly, "I thought, that's the bride of my dreams." Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying, Samuel?" "I'm saying I offered you the housekeeper position because I wanted you to stay," Samuel admitted. "I wanted a chance to know you better, to see if what I felt that first day might grow into something more." "And has it?" Rebecca hardly dared to ask the question. Samuel reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "Yes. I find myself thinking about you all the time, your smile, your laughter, the way you hum when you're kneading bread. I admire your strength, your intelligence, your kindness." Rebecca felt tears prickling behind her eyes. "I've grown fond of you too," she whispered. "More than fond." Samuel's eyes softened. "Rebecca, I know we've known each other only a short time, and I know you came here to marry another man, but I find myself hoping that perhaps, in time, you might consider. That is, I wonder if you could see yourself staying at Circle M, not as my housekeeper, but as my wife." The words hung in the air between them, fragile and momentous. Rebecca felt as though she stood at a crossroads, her future stretching out in two very different directions. "I don't expect an answer now," Samuel hastened to add. "You have the teaching position to consider, and we've only known each other a week. But I wanted you to know where I stand before you make your decision." Rebecca looked at their joined hands, at the strong work-roughened fingers entwined with her own more delicate ones. In that moment, her choice became clear. "I think," she said slowly, "that Mrs. Whitaker will need to find another teacher." Samuel's face lit up with hope. "Does that mean—" "It means I'd like to stay at Circle M," Rebecca said. "Not as your housekeeper, and not yet as your wife. But I'd like the chance to see if what's growing between us might become something worth building a life upon." Samuel's smile was radiant. "I can't think of anything I'd want more." Gently, hesitantly, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a tender kiss that held both promise and respect. When they parted, Rebecca felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world, realigning everything around this new reality where she was not defined by her unusual appearance, but valued for who she truly was. The next morning, Rebecca rode into town with Samuel to speak with Mrs. Whitaker. The older woman took the news of Rebecca's decision with surprising equanimity. "Can't say I'm shocked," she remarked dryly. "The way Samuel Morrison looked at you in church on Sunday made his intentions fairly obvious to anyone with eyes." Rebecca felt herself blush. "We're taking things slowly, getting to know one another properly before making any permanent decisions." Mrs. Whitaker nodded approvingly. "Sensible. Though I expect we'll be hearing wedding bells before winter sets in." She fixed Rebecca with a penetrating gaze. "You'll have to deal with talk, you know. Some folks won't approve." "Some folks never do," Rebecca replied with a small smile. "I've learned not to base my happiness on their opinions." "Good girl," Mrs. Whitaker said. "Now, since you won't be taking the teaching position, perhaps you'd consider helping out at the church social next month? We could use someone with organizational skills." By agreeing to help with the social, Rebecca found herself gradually integrated into the community of Sweetwater. There were still those who whispered behind her back, but increasingly there were others who greeted her warmly, who valued her contributions, who saw past her unusual appearance to the person beneath. At Circle M, her relationship with Samuel deepened day by day. They spent hours talking, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for the future. Samuel taught her to ride properly, and Rebecca introduced him to the poetry of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, reading aloud by lamplight in the evenings. Their courtship progressed with a sweet deliberateness that allowed genuine feelings to develop without the pressure of hasty decisions. Samuel was unfailingly respectful, never presuming upon their living arrangement or taking liberties beyond the occasional tender kiss. One crisp October morning, Samuel suggested a picnic by the creek. The day was unusually warm for the season, a last gift of summer before winter closed in. They rode out together, Rebecca now comfortable enough on horseback to keep pace with Samuel across the rolling grasslands of the ranch. The spot Samuel chose was sheltered by cottonwoods, their golden leaves creating a canopy of light above the clear, rushing water of the creek. He spread a blanket on the ground and unpacked the basket Rebecca had prepared: fried chicken, biscuits, apple tarts, and a jug of sweet cider. After they had eaten, they sat side by side, watching the play of light on the water. Samuel seemed unusually quiet, almost nervous. "Is everything all right?" Rebecca asked, touching his arm gently. Samuel took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what you said, about taking time to build something worth having." Rebecca nodded, her heart beginning to beat faster. "I think we've done that," Samuel continued. "These past weeks have been the happiest of my life. I wake up each morning eager to see your smile, to hear your voice. The ranch feels more like home than it ever has, because you're in it." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "This was my mother's," he said, tipping a simple gold band with a small pearl into his palm. "She told me to give it to the woman who made me as happy as she made my father." Samuel slid from the blanket to one knee beside her. "Rebecca Grant, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because you need a home or I need a housekeeper, but because I love you, gray hair and all, and can't imagine spending my life with anyone else." Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, Samuel Morrison." His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he gathered her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the love and promise that words could not express. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Sweetwater. To Rebecca's surprise and joy, the pews were filled not just with Samuel's friends, but with many townspeople who had come to accept her as one of their own. Mrs. Whitaker sat in the front row, looking smugly satisfied. The Chen family attended in their finest clothes, May beaming with delight at the match she had subtly encouraged from the beginning. Rebecca wore a gown of ivory satin that May had helped her make, and she wore her silver hair loose around her shoulders, adorned only with a crown of autumn wildflowers. As she walked down the aisle to where Samuel waited, his face alight with love and pride, she knew that every trial, every mockery, every whisper behind her back had led her to this moment and this man. "You are the most beautiful bride I've ever seen," Samuel whispered as she reached him. The minister smiled at them both. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls who have found in each other what many search a lifetime for: true acceptance, genuine respect, and abiding love." As they spoke their vows, Rebecca thought of how differently things might have turned out if Frank Hollister had not rejected her, if Samuel had not been at the station that day, if she had not had the courage to start anew in this wild, beautiful country. The reception was held at Circle M, the ranch house and yard transformed with lanterns and flowers. Neighbors from miles around came to celebrate, bringing food and good wishes. There was music and dancing, laughter and tears of joy. As the evening deepened, Samuel led Rebecca away from the festivities to the porch, where they had shared their first kiss. The stars were brilliant overhead, the air crisp with the promise of winter. "Happy, Mrs. Morrison?" Samuel asked, his arms around her waist. Rebecca leaned back against his chest, savoring the sound of her new name. "Completely. And you, Mr. Morrison?" "I have everything I ever dreamed of," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the silver hair he had admired from the first. and so much more than I deserved. Love isn't about deserving, Rebecca said softly. It's about finding the person who sees you, truly sees you, and chooses you anyway. Samuel turned her in his arms to face him. I saw you the moment you stepped off that train, and I'll keep choosing you every day for the rest of our lives. As winter settled over Circle M, Rebecca and Samuel established the rhythms of their married life together. The ranch house, once merely functional, became truly a home under Rebecca's careful attention. Curtains that matched from room to room, cushions on the hard wooden chairs, dried flowers brightening dark corners, small touches that transformed the space into a reflection of their shared life. Christmas brought a blanket of snow and a house full of guests: the Chens, Elijah and Robbie, Samuel's sister Martha and her husband from Cheyenne, and even Mrs. Whitaker, who declared she was too old to cook a Christmas dinner just for herself. Rebecca reveled in the role of hostess, preparing traditional dishes from her New England childhood alongside new recipes learned from May. The house rang with laughter and music, with Samuel playing the fiddle his father had brought west decades earlier, and Martha accompanying him on the small piano that had been Rebecca's wedding gift from her husband. As the new year of 1876 began, Rebecca received news that both surprised and delighted her. She was expecting a child. Samuel's joy knew no bounds. He lifted her in his arms and spun her around the kitchen when she told him, then immediately set her down with exaggerated care, apologizing for his exuberance. A baby, he said wonderingly, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. Our baby. Rebecca covered his hand with her own. I hope he or she has your eyes, she said softly. Samuel smiled. And your silver hair. Rebecca looked at him in surprise. You would wish that on our child? All the stares, the whispers. Times are changing, Samuel said. And our child will grow up knowing they are loved exactly as they are, whatever color their hair might be. He kissed her tenderly. Besides, I happen to think silver hair is the most beautiful thing in the world. Spring brought new calves to the ranch and morning sickness to Rebecca. Samuel was endlessly patient, taking on more household duties without complaint, and bringing her ginger tea and dry toast in bed on her worst mornings. As her body changed with the growing child, Rebecca sometimes caught Samuel watching her with an expression of such wonder and love that it brought tears to her eyes. Their physical relationship, tentative at first, had blossomed into a deep connection that matched the emotional bond between them. Summer arrived, hot and dry, bringing with it the busiest season on the ranch. Despite her advancing pregnancy, Rebecca insisted on continuing her normal activities as much as possible, though she admitted to taking more afternoon rests than before. One particularly warm day in late July, Samuel came in from the fields to find Rebecca sitting at the kitchen table, a letter in her hands and tears on her cheeks. What's wrong? He asked immediately, crossing to her side. Is it the baby? Rebecca shook her head and handed him the letter. It's from Frank Hollister. Samuel's expression darkened as he took the paper. Frank had returned to Pennsylvania after selling his ranch, and they had heard nothing from him since Rebecca's arrival in Wyoming. The letter was brief but surprisingly contrite. Frank explained that he had recently married a widow with 2 young children, and becoming a father figure had changed his perspective on many things. He apologized for his treatment of Rebecca, acknowledging that his rejection had been shallow and unkind. He wished her well and hoped she had found happiness. Well, Samuel said when he finished reading, that's unexpected. Rebecca wiped her tears with the back of her hand. I never thought I'd hear from him again, much less receive an apology. Samuel sat beside her, taking her hand in his. Does it upset you? Hearing from him? No, Rebecca said thoughtfully. Actually, it feels like closing a chapter, like the last loose end being tied up neatly. She smiled at her husband. If he hadn't rejected me, I would never have found you. So in a strange way, I'm grateful to him. Samuel brought her hand to his lips. Then I'm grateful to him too, though I still think he was a fool. His loss was my tremendous gain, Rebecca said, rising somewhat awkwardly due to her rounded figure. Now, help me up. Your son is pressing on my bladder again. Samuel laughed, supporting her as she stood. You're so certain it's a boy? Mother's intuition, Rebecca replied with a mysterious smile. Now, go wash up for dinner. The biscuits are almost done, and I promise they're nothing like rocks. Their son, James William Morrison, was born on a cool September evening in 1876, arriving with a lusty cry and a surprising amount of dark hair. Rebecca's labor had been long but straightforward, with May Chen and the town's midwife attending. Samuel had paced the porch for hours, coming in only when invited to meet his son. The look on his face when he first held James in his arms was one Rebecca knew she would remember for the rest of her life. Wonder, love, and a touch of fear, all mingled together. He's perfect, Samuel whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one gentle finger. Absolutely perfect. Rebecca watched them together, her heart so full she thought it might burst. He looks like you. Samuel smiled, not taking his eyes off his son. Poor boy. As Rebecca recovered her strength, life at Circle M adjusted to accommodate its newest member. James proved to be a good-natured baby, with his father's dark eyes and what promised to be his mother's determined spirit. By his first birthday, it was clear that James had inherited his mother's unusual trait. Fine silver strands were beginning to appear among the dark hair at his temples. Rebecca noticed them first during his bath, and for a moment, her heart sank at the thought of her son facing the same prejudices she had endured. But when she showed Samuel, his reaction surprised her. "Look at that," he said proudly. "Our boy is going to be distinguished, just like his beautiful mama." His easy acceptance reminded Rebecca of how far she had come from the woman who had stepped off the train a year and a half earlier, braced for rejection and mockery. Here, with Samuel and James, her silver hair was not a flaw to be hidden, but a trait to be celebrated, perhaps even a legacy to be passed down. As the years passed, the Morrison family grew. A daughter, Elizabeth May, joined them in 1878, followed by another son, Thomas Elijah, in 1881. None of the younger children showed signs of premature graying, making James unique among his siblings, a fact he came to wear as a badge of honor rather than shame, especially as Samuel always spoke of it with such admiration. Circle M prospered under Samuel's management, expanding to include additional grazing lands and a small apple orchard that became Rebecca's particular project. The ranch house grew as well, with new rooms added to accommodate the children and the steady stream of visitors who found welcome at the Morrison table. Rebecca never did take the teaching position in town, but she found other ways to use her education. She established a small library in one room of the house, open to neighboring families who had limited access to books. During winter months, she held informal classes for ranch children too far from town to attend the school regularly. The community of Sweetwater changed too, growing larger and more diverse as the railroad brought new settlers west. Rebecca, once the subject of whispers and mockery, became a respected figure in the town, serving on committees and organizing community events. The woman who had once hidden her silver hair beneath hats and careful styling now wore it proudly, sometimes loose around her shoulders in the privacy of home, sometimes elegantly arranged for church or social gatherings. Young girls in town occasionally asked if they might touch it, fascinated by its unusual color, and Rebecca always obliged with a smile, remembering a time when such attention would have mortified her. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel surprised Rebecca with a daguerreotype session in Cheyenne, capturing their family at this moment in time, Rebecca with her completely silver hair now more fashionable than unusual, Samuel still handsome though with threads of gray at his temples, and their 3 children arranged around them. James at 12, already showing a distinctive streak of silver among his dark curls. That evening, after the children were asleep, Samuel presented Rebecca with another gift, a delicate silver locket containing a small portrait of them on their wedding day. 10 years, he said as he fastened it around her neck, the best 10 years of my life. Rebecca touched the locket gently. Do you ever wonder what might have happened if Frank Hollister had met me at the station that day instead of you? Samuel considered the question seriously. I think about it sometimes. I like to believe I would have found my way to you eventually. Some things are meant to be. Such a romantic, Rebecca teased, though she was touched by his words. Only with you, Samuel replied, drawing her into his arms. Only ever with you. As they stood together on the porch of the home they had built, looking out at the ranch bathed in moonlight, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the painful years in Boston, where her gray hair had marked her as different, to that fateful day at Sweetwater Station, where mockery had led to an unexpected defender, to this moment of complete belonging. I love you, Samuel Morrison, she said, leaning back against his solid warmth. Gray hair and all. Samuel's arms tightened around her. And I love you, Rebecca Morrison. Gray hair especially. Under the vast Wyoming sky, with stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet darkness, they sealed this renewed promise with a kiss as tender and true as their first. The silver-haired bride and the cowboy who had declared her the bride of his dreams had found in each other exactly what they needed: acceptance, respect, and a love that only deepened with time. And in the years that followed, whenever newcomers to Sweetwater remarked on Mrs. Morrison's unusual silver hair, they were quickly informed that it was considered quite beautiful in these parts, especially by her husband, who had loved it from the very first day,